just
Is this good for me?
Go ahead and do a few things.
And then I froze. I didn't know what to say.
Well, isn't it odd? You never know what to
I
say.
never know what to say.
Nothing's wrong,
Testing,
but you don't
one,
really know
two,
what to
three.
That's
say.
perfect.
Testing.
That's perfect. That's fine.
Oh, well.
It's the presence of the microphone that makes you go, ooh, this is
Yeah.
for posterity.
I
so-
know.
So get it right.
I'm Linnell, and he's my brother from another mother.
I'm Rob, and she's my sister from the same mister.
Hello, Linnell.
Hello, Rob.
How are you doing today?
I'm great for the second time
For the
today.
second time today. And with us we have Joe Stanley. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We're going to talk to you about some of your sibling things. Before we do, I'd like to take a moment and brag on myself a little bit, and doing it on this episode because I'm thinking a lot of your followers will wind up listening to this. So
I hope so.
I want to just talk about a group that I've recently become an instructor for that's called Guitars for Veterans. And what they do is they give a 10-week basic guitar course to military veterans that, for the most part, aren't familiar with guitars or have very little familiarity with guitars. So they get a 10-week introductory course to it. And at the end of that 10 weeks, they provide them with a guitar. And not just
nice.
some little
That's
$60
incredible.
stick from Walmart. It's a
Right.
it's not high end. It's not a Martin D28 or anything, but it's a generally probably around a $200 or $300 guitar and some other accessories and stuff. And I found out about them on Facebook and kind of wanted to join the local chapter because we do have a local chapter here. But their training is on Mondays at 4:30, so that's a little. I work in
Tough during the
Blacksburg.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I work in Blacksburg. I just can't guarantee I'd be home at 4:30, even if I leave at 3:30, because a lot of times there's wrecks and stuff like that. So, but they got me in contact with the director of the cyber chapter, the online chapter. And so I talked to that guy, and I guess it's going through Department of Veterans Affairs.
That sounds like an incredible program.
But it really is. I went through their background check and interview with the director, and so now I'm an instructor with them. And it's not really about wanting to brag about myself. I want to brag about the organization.
Well, the program.
Guitars
Yeah,
for Veterans.
for sure.
And I encourage anybody who might be interested to contact them to be an instructor. If you want, if you're a veteran and have been looking for a way to learn guitar but just haven't felt like going into expensive lessons through teachers and stuff like that, definitely look into Guitars for Vets because they'll hook you up.
Aside from just enriching your life, my master's degree is in educational theater, which there's a large component of arts therapy in that. And the therapeutic benefits of the arts and learning an instrument and things like that
Right.
it's an incredible thing to
yeah.
offer people. So
Sure, yeah.
That, aside from just enriching lives of others, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And you can do that over online, like Zoom. They don't have
Yes.
to be in person. And
That's right. We're using the student that I have now, and I've done 2 lessons with, and I've never been a teacher. I've never been trained to be a teacher, so sometimes I feel a little out of my depth, but then I'm teaching guitar, and that's something I know at least a little bit about. So
Right. Well, you probably get to recall on how you learned.
I mean, they always say if you want to learn something better, teach it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got a good student. He's very attentive. He's very responsive. He's not, and that's the thing. Once they've gone through the vetting process, once
I see
they
what you did there.
once they go through the vetting process, it's pretty clear they want to learn guitar. So I'm not going to get a sullen student who's being forced to do this by their parents or something like that. So, this is somebody who wants to learn. And I told my student up front, I'm not a teacher. I can show you all of this. I'm trying to learn to be a teacher. I'm following their curriculum, but just bear with me. And he's taught in the past. So I said, well, you show me how to be a teacher and I'll show you how to play guitar.
Perfect
so
combination.
It's working out for us. But I just wanted to bring that up quick. We'll get back to you now, Joe.
Well.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, we're going to talk about your family relationships, but let's hear a little bit about you and what you're doing.
and what you're doing, yeah.
Well, I live in Callaway, Virginia, Callaway the only way. My family moved
There's only
there.
one way in, one way out.
Oh no, that's the crazy thing.
That's the
There's about
crazy- I
40
know.
different ways to get to Callaway. It's
They're all
actually
through the
convenient.
woods.
It's convenient to Salem. It's
Yeah.
convenient to the things south of Rocky Mount. I mean, you've got 221, 122, 220.
That is true. There's a lot.
Yeah.
Of
There are a lot of different back ways you
Yeah.
can. Of course, there were a lot of moonshiners from there, so.
Oh yeah.
They
So
made-
they made the paths,
they made
right?
the paths.
They need to know which road they can go on.
That's
this
right.
street.
That's right.
For sure.
No, my family moved there in the 1740s,
Oh wow.
and they've been there ever since.
They've been alive that long.
They've been alive.
Wow.
You should hear the
Must be some
groans when
good water.
I
you
know.
should hear the groans when people get behind
It's
us
the
in the grocery
moonshine.
store. No, it's so the whole family stayed there, and I'm convinced at this point that if you're from Franklin County and your family's been there more than 40 years, we are related in some way. And give me 10 minutes and I'll figure that out. My grandparents during World War II moved to Roanoke City. And I grew up on the same street that my grandparents did, but
Oh.
weekends and things like that were spent Callaway.
Callaway.
All the family events were in Callaway and that sort of thing. So I went to Ferrum College for my undergraduate.
Oh,
and
nice.
When I left Ferrum, I went to NYU, New York University,
Wow.
to do my master's degree. And if I'm honest, I wanted to move to New York.
Right. One of the
I mean, NYU
experience.
is an incredible school, but the draw was the city,
Uh-huh.
not NYU. And I stayed in New York for 8 years. While I was there, I studied to be a teacher. I taught briefly in London and loved that.
Mm.
And then I taught very briefly in New York City and realized this is not for me.
Oh.
It's a little different.
We
in New
have
York
a
City.
different educational system. And it really wasn't the kids. It was all of the other things around it that stood in the way of you actually
Yeah.
teaching the kid and
Right.
being a part
Right.
of their life. I always think I grew up at a magical time. Teachers could actually teach, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
no one was afraid to tell you no.
Right.
No one was afraid to put you on the right path or put you in the right direction. So I left teaching in New York and I went into advertising and worked for some huge Fortune 100 companies there and did some marketing for the New York Knicks, etc. And then in 2002, my sister passed away suddenly, and she was separated and had a little girl, a baby. My parents took the baby. The biological dad, had chose not to be a part of her life.
That's,
And then my mom got sick, and with a phone call, I became a parent overnight.
Wow.
So I got married when she was 16 months old. She's 24 now. We both survived.
Oh.
So,
That's
but I
great.
moved back here, and I moved to Callaway. And I live a quarter of a mile from where my family settled
you
in
grew up.
1740.
Isn't that
that's
something?
very cool.
So
Yeah.
it's great when back there, it's right up on the Parkway, and I oftentimes, as I daydream or whatever, will be out there, and you just look up and you think you're looking at literally the same thing that your seventh,
Oh
eighth
gosh. Yeah.
great grandparents looked at. That
Yeah.
people for generations.
Because a lot of that is still
it's-
untouched, and
Right.
the scenery looks the
Right.
same.
I
Yeah.
imagine, at one point the mountains were covered with American chestnut, and now they're not American
Right.
chestnut, but the shape of them is still
Right.
the same, and it's untouched, and
Yeah.
it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful. I will always maintain, I've been a lot of places on this planet, but Callaway
You
is
have.
just
You have some
one of
cool
the most beautiful
stories.
places
Yeah.
I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So, but
Now, did you start doing the history on your family like that far back? Like,
I started doing genealogy when I was about 12. I had two grandmothers who weren't fond of one another.
imagine.
And
Ain't nothing like grandmas and
Yeah.
all like each other.
one grandmother gave me a Robertson family history,
Uh-huh.
and she was a Robertson, and I was mesmerized by it, and happened to mention it in front of my other grandmother, and she all but went, "Oh hell no!" And then she gave me, and both of them, they both gave me family histories, but they were like 12-page printouts. It could go back 2 or 3 generations, and
Yeah.
And
Was
that
either one of
it.
them close to what you found out for the truth?
Oh no, they were. Well, no.
Right.
No, to be quite honest. Lots of interesting facts. Franklin County, I think, has fascinating family histories because of where it sits geographically. It is on the Carolina Road, which ran north-south. You had a lot of the Scotch-Irish come in into Pennsylvania to the port there around York, Pennsylvania, and then they traveled down by wagon on what is called the Carolina Road, which basically runs the path of 220.
Okay.
So you had those folks, but then and those were largely German Baptists and the Scotch Irish.
Right.
Then you have the Eastern Road that went east to west, and you had a lot of the early Virginia settlers from Tidewater, the English, the second son of a second son, those folks who came east-west, and the two roads crossed in Franklin County.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find people there with histories that are attached to, and it's not that you find, like the Robertsons are closely related to Patrick Henry. Lots of Tidewater aristocracy, Henry Clay, Thomas Jefferson, tons of us are related to those people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that you're related to them that sets it apart. For me, it's the fascination of that you can look at your own family history in a small frame, but see a greater history of this country
Right.
at large, of how we grew and expanded and where we went and the culture we come from, the mistakes we made, the way we've worked to improve them,
Right.
if we've worked to improve them.
Yeah.
It's not a celebration of a single ancestor. It's
Right.
a celebration of, I think, the story of this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
But through the years, I've been doing it, and I would say pretty actively since a very young age. I can trace my family many lines back to 650. And
That's
at
pretty
times
cool.
it becomes more of a family vine
Is
than
that
a family
PM
tree.
or AM?
That's AM. No, that's AM. AM, trust me. It
Very
goes
early.
quite a way back. But I was fortunate. There are a couple early Virginia settlers that if you can connect to them, then a large part of that work is already done.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's been recorded. It's
Yeah.
Big
Is it-
chunks of it just fall
big
in
Right,
your
it
hands.
just falls
and
right
you
there,
go,
yeah.
What?
Right.
And I had that, but it wasn't until I started doing, in 2012, I took my first DNA test
Mm-hmm.
for ancestry purposes. And when you can confirm it and you go, that's kind of incredible.
Yeah.
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 It's kind of incredible.
Get tied into
Kinda blows your
historical
mind.
figures
Right.
that everybody
Yeah.
knows about.
And there's
Yeah.
some fascinating stories that have some supposition about this person's life or this situation or that situation. So it's fascinating. I'm never not fascinated by genealogy.
Oh yeah.
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 Almost
I
as
love that.
fascinated as I am
Should
by
I
the
do my
glossy look in
joke
people's
for-
eyes when I bring it up, and you can see them just
They go.
drifting off. So, yeah, snap. No, we're not genealogy.
And they're like, it's great.
Right.
One of our previous guests, Robert Wright, who that was the one that just released this weekend. He was also into genealogy,
Mm-hmm.
and I made the joke, is that where you rub the lamp?
Right.
Yeah.
And then I
When you're looking for a particular ancestor, when you hit a brick wall on a certain line, yes, you are.
and I wonder
Won't.
why they don't use a genie for genealogy.
Yeah, that would
Why don't they have a
Be a
That would
great
be
marketing.
great.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would be great marketing.
Yeah.
Hey, if somebody wants that, contact me. We can talk terms.
Well, there's also there are several schools within genealogy, and there are the people who pursue it in an effort to find that famous ancestor they're kin to.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's an academic side to genealogy, and those people feel like you have to have 47 original documents to prove this.
Where's the fun in that? They take all the fun out.
But then you go back through places, Daughters of the American Revolution, which for years you had to have all the documentation, which is useful. They have an incredible archive. You can find some great information there. But then with the dawning of DNA testing, you find some of that documentation really didn't mean anything if it was incorrect.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care how many stamps or seals are on it.
Yeah.
Right.
It wasn't correct.
Wasn't correct.
So, and then I do it just out of a it is a fascination to me, and it really grew once when my sister got sick. We have a condition in our family called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency syndrome, and it is a liver condition, and your liver doesn't produce. This is a really dumbed down, simplified way to explain it. Your liver doesn't produce the enzymes that your body needs necessarily to keep the other organs functioning and soft, etc.
Huh.
But it's like liver. You have one job.
One job.
Right.
But in order for you to have it, both of your parents, it's not passed by one gene.
Right.
Both parents have to have it.
Oh,
in
gosh.
the same sense of, it affects people primarily of Northern European descent.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way that sickle cell affects the black community primarily.
Yeah.
That it. But then I got to thinking, as I'm looking at my genealogy, that every single person who came before me, my direct ancestors, all had this gene.
Yeah,
And in today's world where we have cars and all the ways that we can meet up with people, that's great. But go back 100 years, 150 years, there could have been a mud hole, a tree in the road, a cart couldn't do here, a horse.
Right.
But somehow, mathematically, these people met.
Mm-hmm.
And they met someone, and none of them knew any of this is what they were carrying or what was being passed down through the lines or anything.
Yeah.
But just the mathematical equation behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's not that much math. I'm just really bad at math, but it fascinates me.
Well, we met you at Living Proof beer company?
Yes.
Living Proof
Shout
beer.
out to Living Proof.
Yay!
Well, I like to shout out any of the places that we've been to and that we've enjoyed. And we do like going there. They've got good beer, so.
Yeah.
They've just celebrated 2 years.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's right.
they did.
Last weekend.
Last week or the week before, but it was still, it's 2 years in Rocky Mount. So.
Mm-hmm.
And we met you there because you were hosting the trivia bingo.
Trivia bingo that night.
And we wanted to go just because we wanted to pass out some flyers, bring some recognition to our podcast. And Linnell, tell from your perspective.
Hit me. I was like, what? I'm on? I'm on? Hello?
I'm just relieved to know that things can be cut out.
Yes, things can be cut out. I'm
Good.
yeah. And if there's something you want cut out, let us know.
I will.
And by the way, when we really get into it, we curse like sailors.
Yeah, so we'll, if it offends you, we don't mean to offend. We'll tame it down if you would like us to tame it down.
It says, I love Jesus, but I cuss a lot.
Okay. Yeah. See, you can do both. But I got there a little early that night to get a table. I didn't know how crowded it was going to be, and you were already set up with your table. Yeah, and I brought a flyer over, and you were like,
I told you not to leave
you
it.
said don't leave it. I was like, oh my God.
You almost made an enemy for life.
I was like gonna cry.
Well, as someone who hands out flyers, I thought, well, I'm hosting, so I'm going to be busy.
Sure.
I wanted to make sure you had enough flyers for all the tables.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And then you were like, wait, what is this?
right. And then when I read it, I went, oh my God, this is serendipity. This is kismet.
Exactly.
This is everything that was ever meant to be.
Right. Like the
Because-
stars lined up and we were there together at this time to hear that you had a sibling story.
Well, my experience over the past 12 years has been, and I will say, before we get into the story, there are times that this is happening and you feel very much alone because you think, there's no way this has ever happened to anyone else.
Yeah, right.
There's no way
And
this
then we
is...
come
And
walking
then-
into
And then
your
you
life.
come walking in.
In Rocky Mount and da-da-da.
As one does.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
So, and it's interesting, it is interesting to me to talk to people who are outside of my situation but share a similar scenario.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's becoming the whole point of our
Yeah.
podcast.
Right.
Is doing
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
So we definitely wanted to get you here and hear your story.
Well,
Yeah.
it is,
I don't know if you've heard any of ours or
I have, I've listened,
and
yes.
then the guest before you today asked us a few questions, so we led into a little more of our background, so you can listen to that on the next episode.
can't wait.
Episode 11.
11. Congratulations on 11 episodes.
Well,
Wait a minute.
11 was Robert Wright.
Yes.
That was the one we released Wednesday.
And then today,
Earlier today, we recorded episode 12 with Ashley.
That's right.
And this is episode 13.
we're moving
My
on
lucky
along.
number.
We hope
I
it's
didn't even
lucky.
think about that. Never mind. This is episode 14. No, I'm really not.
We're skipping
superstitious.
13.
I'm not superstitious.
I'm a
No,
little
no.
stitious, but not superstitious.
Yeah.
Knock on wood.
No,
I can't find any wood.
I will be honest, my sainted mother was very superstitious, and I really am not superstitious at all, but let me see a black cat and I will put a spit X on my windshield.
yeah.
in a heartbeat.
Exactly.
And
Just
liter-
in
and-
case she
and
was
then-
right,
and
you
then
know?
just to cover myself, even when I'm all alone, I go, that was for you, Mama.
Yeah,
Black
exactly.
cat's just over there going, "Aw."
It's like I just tried to cross the road.
Right.
What?
I'm just a kid.
Every
Right.
time.
So
So,
let's, yeah.
well, my being true, country Franklin County, I always have to start out, grew up poor. No.
Yeah.
If you live in Franklin County, I think it's just understood.
Right. No, I want to preface anything I say with, I am the most blessed human being on the planet. I have, my dad's still with us, two of the best people to be parents that you could ever imagine. I grew up in a home of nothing but love and empowerment and learn to do it yourself, kind of, but never in a way that was mistreating
Right.
you or
Right.
it was
Yeah.
empowering you.
Uh-huh.
They didn't
And-
necessarily throw you in the deep end of the pool in order to learn to swim. They
So
would
that didn't
actually
happen to
help you.
everybody. Is just being clear.
What's that?
Being thrown into the deep end, sink or swim.
I did get thrown into Snow Mountain Lake at one point.
Okay, all right.
And
So
my
your
revenge
life
was to
wasn't
come out with
perfect.
pink
I'm
eye,
just kidding.
but,
That was a particularly dirty
No, I was very fortunate. As I grew older, I say I grew up poor, but I never wanted for anything.
Right.
My parents were
Right.
the hardest working people to this day, my dad is truly, and I think I almost say it objectively, objectively, not objectionably. Although he would say I do that too. His favorite joke was, we taught you to walk and talk, and we spent 52 years trying to get you to shut up and sit down. No, the hardest worker I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And there were tough times. When I was a kid, it was 1981, January, my dad was an iron worker and got laid off, and he took his last paycheck and bought an ancient pickup truck. And my mother would go every day, start in the phone book, and cold call people and sell firewood. And my dad would go cut firewood all day. He'd bring it home. As a family, we'd be out there chopping it, stacking it. And we lived that way for a year and a half.
Just a minute. For some of our younger listeners, a phone book was a book that had a list of names and addresses and phone numbers of people in your area.
Yeah, because they're
Okay.
probably going
Right.
phone book.
Right.
What's a phone
Phone
book?
book. Because we have so many young listeners.
Well, your
Under the
daughter.
age of, yeah.
Right. And by ancient truck, I'm not talking about a 2005.
Yeah.
This was like a 1960. It was this green color. It was incredible. But it was just seeing the way they worked, and there was never a complaining or bemoaning of, we've got it bad, we've got this. It was just what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
And now that I have raised a child and I am 53, I look back and think, wow, what an example, but what love and what I was given.
Yeah.
So, my mother had grown up extremely poor in really bad conditions. I didn't learn that until I was an adult and she was sick, and I took care of her, and we had lots of very painful conversations. Her father died in World War II, and my grandmother did not take being left 20 years old with two children under the age of 3 very well.
Right.
And she began to drink. And it spiraled. And my mother grew up in abject poverty, the victim of horrific abuse. And I have pieced together that she swore over her dead body would her children ever go through that.
Right.
That's good. I mean, she broke that cycle.
She broke that cycle.
Yeah.
I have some pictures that I have talked in. I do one of the things called Hoot and Holler, which is a local event where we do storytelling in the vein of the Moth Radio Hour on NPR. And you tell a 10-minute story.
Okay.
And they're all, we say they're true to the teller. I mean, they're true, but
Right.
It's also your opinion and your take on a series of events.
Right.
But we did one for Family Promise, which is a group of various churches that provides housing for families in crisis. And I told the story of my mother. And it was, for years I thought, I don't know how really to process it I didn't know my grandmother when she was in that shape.
Right.
I knew my grandmother as my doting grandmother.
I guess she was sober and her, yeah.
Sure. She still nipped a bit.
Right.
As do we all.
Nothing wrong with that. But I think as her children got older and the responsibility, well, there weren't responsibilities for her to shirk anymore because her children were all grown.
Yeah.
Right.
And they all made sure their children lived very differently. So I'm deeply thankful for that. Anyway, but I shared some pictures and I talked about Christmas morning because Christmas morning was always, you could count on it. We'd get up very early, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and open our gifts. And Mama smoked. She'd sit there in the chair as we opened our
Sure,
gifts.
yep.
In that wood-paneled living room.
Oh, yeah.
With that...
It's bringing back memories,
very
nostalgia.
70s.
Yeah.
That rickrack orange, yellow, and brown Afghan on the back of the sofa.
You see a picture of that and you could smell the
You
can
smell it.
cigarette
Yeah.
smoke in it.
But Mama would sit there and we would laugh and rip the presents open and we'd get to playing and you'd look over and she was the saddest person on the planet. And eventually every Christmas morning I was in the floor playing and I'd end up on my knees next to Mama's chair and ask her what's wrong. You know, I think I don't know about other people, but if I saw my mom sad, it broke my heart.
Right.
And when she'd cry, whew, it was too much. But she would always say, "It's okay, baby. It's just so many people you wish were here." And eventually we would get back distracted by playing and Mama would go back to bed. And you'd hear her in there just sobbing into her pillow. And I always thought it was just about my grandfather. Because I knew he died when she was less than 1 year old. Everyone in the family called her Buddy because the one time he held her, he sang that song from the 40s, My Buddy. My Buddy and Me, and that sort of nickname stuck with her. So there was lots of hints out there, but I always took them to be about my grandfather. My mother did pass away in June of 2002, and I don't want to say life goes on, like it impacts you deeply.
Oh, yeah.
But I had Mary to raise, who was 16 months old, and you just get right back into the
day-to-day grind.
Life goes on.
Yeah.
Right.
Life makes you go on.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't give you much more than a pause.
And as we got into our routine and things started to settle, I had really good job in New York and I had saved some money, so I spent the first 5 years as an at-home parent with Mary and I. My dad lives with us, but I was that stay-home parent that I had.
Right.
With Mary, and so I get back into genealogy and things are going along, and then the DNA tests come out, and I thought, well, I'll do this for $49. So I sent off one for Ancestry, and then another one came up pretty quickly through 23andMe.
Yeah.
And I did the 23andMe at that time offered these extensive health reports, which is terrifying and could be its own podcast in itself.
Lord.
When you
right.
get the response.
Yeah.
But I got those and I got some incredible hints and was able to do some good work on my ancestry stuff of finding out, oh, this is knock this brick wall down of making leeway. And went on, and it was a couple years, and one day I got a message via email through Ancestry that said, "Do you know Mary McMinnis Stanley?" And I said, "Yes, that's my mom." And so they go, "Oh, that's interesting."
Okay. And why is that?
Why is
They
that?
do a lot of
What's that? How's that interesting? So it eventually comes out over a couple of days. Well, it said, "I'm related to your brother." And I respond, "Oh, you know Billy?" They respond, "Who's Billy?"
Oh.
Who are you?
Yeah, wait a minute.
Let's just please
rewind.
Don't worry about the politeness here. Let's just cut to the chase and tell me what's going on. And it was from who is a dear friend, I think the world of her, Lori, had messaged me. She had been adopted as a child and into a home, and they had also adopted a little boy. And he did not have as much interest in finding his family, I think, but she was interested in finding hers. And in the course of searching, she found his before she found hers. So she reached out, and turns out that as a teenager, my mother became pregnant as a young teenager, and was forced to place the child for adoption.
Right.
All of this story is, I get a little nervous in telling it, and not from you all. I mean that when I say this, but
we're sweethearts.
there are but there are things that, and part of it shows from my age. I think there are people who, at the time that this happened, there was lots of judgment against young women like that.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
There was a world where people pretended that teenagers didn't have sex, and everyone had equal opportunity, and it was not the nuclear. My mother did not grow up in a nuclear family of 2.5 children and 2 reasonable adults as parents. She basically raised herself and her younger siblings with the help of her older sister Martha. I mean, their story is amazing. Anyway, my mother had become pregnant when she was 15, and she kept the baby, and that's my brother Billy.
Okay.
She had left living with her mother and moved in with her grandparents. And about a year later...
Her and the child.
About a year later, she became pregnant again. And she was told that if she wanted to keep that baby, she would have to move back to her mother's. Well, my grandmother was married to a man who did horrific things to my mother. And did horrific things to the other kids. And my mother had to make the decision, do you go back and put everyone in danger, or do you place this child for adoption?
Yeah.
And she placed the child for adoption. When she was 18, she became pregnant again and was faced with the same option.
Was she still at the grandparents at that time?
She was still at the grandparents. And she had quit school in the 8th grade because she had to make money to raise Billy.
Yeah.
Right.
And so she placed the second child for adoption. She married my dad when she was 23. And my dad knew about one of the babies. He did not know about the second one. But when I found them, I was heartsick and bereft that... Sorry, those Christmas mornings.
Right.
Yeah. It all starts coming together.
And my mother was by far the best friend I've ever had. So there are times you wonder, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
Why didn't I know?
Well, she was being the adult.
She was
and
being
keeping,
the adult.
protecting you.
Absolutely.
Protecting you. Yeah.
And I've come to terms with all of that. And first of all, how selfish of me to make any of it about me.
But
the sacrifices that she, or the life she went through, and the sacrifices she was forced to make, and the decisions she was forced to make, and live with that. And at a time, my mother died in 2002, there wasn't the DNA testing, there wasn't the ability. Virginia laws are not kind to adoptees, and not to anyone in the process of figuring out where this loved one is. on the other side, whether you were the one placed for adoption or you were the one placing someone for adoption. And
So at 18, had she had 3?
3.
And she
was
kept
disabled
Billy
for
and then
one, yeah.
and then
had placed the other 2.
the other 2.
They came to me a year apart. They both found me. I did not.
Oh, okay.
And
Had
so-
they already found each other when they?
No.
Oh.
They did not know the other existed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I often think about my mother crying on Christmas and many other times talking about the people who aren't here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I just always assumed she was talking about Granddaddy Bill. Because even though he died in the war, he was still very much a part of our life and talking about him and talking about
Right.
Yeah.
all of those things. But then I realized she was talking about also
Siblings. Yeah.
the children that she had lost.
Yeah.
And on a lighter note, I will say, not a lighter note for them. You have these conversations, and these people they weren't local at the time. One lived on Bugs Island on the Virginia-North Carolina border, and the other brother, both are brothers, the other one lived in Orlando, Florida.
Yeah.
And the worst part, there's joy, there's questions, there's all of this stuff swirling through your head.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I have to say, the worst part comes when they ask to speak to my mother.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have to explain that they're passed.
Yeah.
Right.
And my mom died when she was 57. So that's relatively young. In
Sure.
both cases, she could have very easily still been alive.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
to meet them and
yeah.
There's also the nature of, again, and I see no shame in it personally, the nature of their birth, the situation, they have questions why, all of those. And the story as to why is a difficult story for people. It's a
Right.
difficult story for me to recount. You can hear it in my voice. But I tried to take the perspective of this is their journey, this is their story.
Right.
Yeah.
I will always be honest with them. I will be open with them. I will share every bit of information I have, the painful stuff, the wonderful stuff, all of it. But I was clear in both cases. The thing I will never do, though, is disparage or besmirch my mother.
Exactly. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Well, they're going to have a different...
if she were here, you two could have that conversation and that be between you all.
Right.
She's not.
Right.
Don't try to have that
That's what I
conversation
said.
with
Yeah.
me.
Don't
With
try
you.
to have
Yeah.
a conversation with
I always
me.
say
And I
I
mean
can
that
speak
with
on
love.
my behalf.
Right.
You know, I
I
don't know
mean
about
that-
my other siblings.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean that with love.
Right.
I don't want that to be the basis of our
Yeah.
relationship.
Right.
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 Because neither one of us had anything to do with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And they definitely grew up with a different perspective, not having known their mother, whereas you did, and you got to see, you know, the good and the bad.
well, and I also struggle with that a little bit in the sense that my mother, I will tell people I am an unabashed mama's boy. My mother loved me in a way that made me feel every morning the sun rose to shine on this face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it was...
I think she was cherishing those
Just to be
moments.
clear, the sun rises for a completely different
According to you.
I like that. That was a good response.
That's all we have for you this time.
We want to hear your stories, especially those of you who have siblings you've discovered later in life, like us.
Send email to linnellandrob@gmail.com. That email address will appear in the podcast episode's description, and we'll read all your emails over the air.